The Grand Assembly Hall was the largest room ever built by any species in the known galaxy. It floated in space above a dead world called Prime, a place chosen because no one owned it and no one wanted it. The hall was shaped like a bowl, with seats rising up on all sides. In those seats sat the representatives of 47 different species. Some had scales, some had fur, some were made of crystal that caught the light, some looked like insects and some looked like nothing at all. In the center of this great bowl stood a single human woman. Her name was, she was not tall, she was not loud. She wore simple clothes, dark blue, with no medals or symbols of rank. Her black hair was pulled back from her face. Her hands were folded in front of her. She looked very small standing there alone, surrounded by thousands of alien eyes. High Arbitrator Vel looked down at her from his raised platform. He was one of the oldest species in the council. His body was thin and gray, with too many joints in places where joints should not be. His eyes were black and deep, like holes in space. He had lived for over 300 years, and he had never once changed his mind about anything. Today, he was going to remove humanity from the Galactic Council. "This emergency session has been called for one purpose," Vel said. His voice was cold and dry. "The species known as humans have proven themselves unfit for membership. We will hear the charges. Then we will vote." Did not move, she did not speak, she simply waited. The first to rise was Delegate of the Collective. Was with a hard shell and compound eyes that reflected the light in 1,000 different directions. When she spoke, her voice clicked and buzzed. "Humans are culturally invasive," said. "Their music has spread to our hive worlds. Our young drones hum strange melodies instead of working. They tap their limbs to rhythms that have no purpose. This is not natural. This is corruption." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Next rose a being made entirely of living crystal. Light passed through her body and scattered into rainbows on the walls. "Human art has infected our youth," they said. "They no longer create pure geometric forms, they make images, pictures of things that do not exist, fantasies, dreams. This is pollution of the mind." More agreement, more nodding heads and clicking mandibles. The representatives stood next. They were amphibious, with wet skin and wide mouths full of tiny teeth. They were known as the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They did not know fear. They did not know mercy. "Humans have made our warriors soft," they said. His voice was thick with disgust. "They brought something called comedy. Our soldiers now make jokes. They laugh. They no longer wish to die in battle. This is weakness. This is shame." One by one, the species rose to speak. They complained that humans negotiated too well in trade. They accused humans of spreading dangerous philosophy. A gas-based species whose name could not be pronounced said that humans smelled wrong. Through all of this stood silent. When the last complaint had been spoken, High Arbitrator Vel turned his deep black eyes toward her. "Human ambassador," he said, "you have heard the charges against your species. You stand accused of cultural invasion, economic disruption, and psychological corruption. Do you wish to respond before the vote?" Looked up at him, her face showed no fear. Her voice was steady and calm. "I wish to respond," she said, "but not with words." The chamber went quiet. "Before you vote," continued, "I ask only one thing. Review the complete record of human integration into this council, all of it, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange, every friendship formed and every conflict resolved. Look at everything we have done since we joined you. Then decide." High Arbitrator Vel's many-jointed fingers tapped against his platform. "The records are extensive," he said. "A full review would take 3 cycles." "Then take 3 cycles," said. "What is 3 days against the judgment of an entire species?" The chamber buzzed with conversation. Some delegates looked angry, others looked confused, a few looked curious. Vel raised one thin hand, and silence fell. "Very well," he said. "The vote will be delayed. The review will be conducted. In 3 cycles, we will decide the fate of humanity. The session ended. Delegates rose from their seats and began to leave, talking among themselves in a dozen different languages. Remained where she was, watching them go. As the crowd thinned, a figure approached her. It was Delegate, the who had spoken first against humanity. Stopped a few steps away. Her compound eyes were impossible to read. "You know they will still vote against you," said quietly. 3 cycles will change nothing. The decision was made before you entered this chamber. Smiled. It was a small smile, just a slight curve of her lips. "Perhaps," she said. "Then why delay? Why ask for a review that will not save you?" Turned to face the fully. Her eyes were warm, almost kind. "Tell me, Delegate," she said, "do you truly believe human music has corrupted your hives, or has it simply given your young drones something they never had before?" Was silent for a long moment. Her mandibles clicked softly. "I must go," she said finally and turned away. Watched her leave. When she was alone in the great empty hall, she let out a slow breath. "I am counting on them to try," she said to no one. "That is exactly what I need them to do." Above her, the lights of the assembly hall began to dim. In 3 days, the vote would come. In 3 days, humanity would face judgment. Was not afraid. She had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. The Council's Financial Oversight Committee met in a room filled with floating screens. Numbers and charts drifted through the air like glowing ghosts. 5 senior accountants from 5 different species sat around a curved table. Their job was simple: find evidence that humans had cheated, stolen, or manipulated their way into galactic trade. Find a reason to remove them. Finance Minister of the Union led the investigation. He was a practical creature, with gray skin and 4 arms that moved constantly over data pads. They were famous for their love of money. They understood trade better than any species alive. If humans had done something wrong, would find it. He started with shipping records. The first name that appeared was a human merchant who ran a shipping company called Bright Star Logistics, expected to find hidden fees, unfair contracts, or secret deals. Instead, he found something he did not understand. His company charged fair prices. Sometimes he charged less than fair prices. His ships arrived on time. His crews were polite. When cargo was damaged, paid for replacement without argument. When customers had complaints, listened and fixed the problem. "This makes no sense," muttered. "He is losing money on half these contracts." His assistant, a young named, pulled up more data. "Actually, Minister, he is not losing money. His customer return rate is 94%. Other shipping companies average 30%. He makes less per delivery, but he makes more deliveries." Stared at the numbers. He ran them again. The math was correct. "He is building loyalty," said slowly. "He treats customers well so they come back. This is," he searched for the word, "this is inefficient, and yet it works." The investigation continued. Next came the technology patents. A human engineer named held over 200 patents registered with the Galactic Council, expected to find stolen ideas or designs. Instead, he found original inventions, new types of engine coolant, better water purification systems, medical scanners that were smaller and cheaper than anything the Council had ever produced. "These patents are licensed to 300 different companies," reported, "charges reasonable fees. She does not create monopolies. She lets others use her work." Felt a cold feeling growing in his stomach. "Pull up the translation matrix contracts," he ordered. The screen shifted. New data appeared. The translation matrices were the most important technology in the galaxy. They allowed every species to understand every other species. Without them, the Council could not function. Had always assumed the matrices were Council property, developed by ancient species long ago. He was wrong. 60% of the current translation software had been written or improved by human programmers. The updates had been introduced slowly over 40 years. Small improvements, better accuracy, faster processing. No one had noticed because the changes were gradual, but now, looking at the full picture, could see the truth. Human code was everywhere. If we remove humans, said quietly, who will maintain this software? Who will fix bugs? Who will make updates? Did not answer. He was already pulling up the agricultural data. Human farming techniques had been adopted on 17 different worlds. Human food preservation methods had ended 3 famines. Human crop rotation systems had saved from a soil crisis that would have killed billions. Trade route data showed that human-designed navigation protocols were used by 70% of all cargo ships. Human safety standards had become the galactic default. Human entertainment, music, stories, games, had created an industry worth more than the entire military budget of the collective. Ran the final calculation. His 4 hands trembled as he entered the numbers. If humanity was expelled from the Council, 7 major trade routes would collapse. The crystal market would lose 40% of its buyers. They would lose their primary source of agricultural innovation. The translation matrices would begin to fail within 5 years. Economic recovery would take an estimated 250 years. 250 years, whispered. He ran the calculation again. The answer was the same. He ran it a 3rd time. Same answer. Leaned closer. Minister, what do we do? Sat back in his chair. For a long moment he was silent. His 4 hands had stopped moving for the first time in hours. They did not conquer our markets, he said finally. They did not threaten us. They did not cheat or steal or lie. He turned to face his assistant. His eyes were wide with something that looked almost like fear. They made themselves essential. They wove themselves into the fabric of everything we do. They became so useful, so helpful, so necessary that removing them would tear the entire galaxy apart. Considered this, is that not a form of conquest? Shook his head slowly. No, conquest is taking what others have. This is something different. This is giving. They gave us better ships, better food, better medicine, better communication. They gave until we could not imagine life without their gifts. He looked at the glowing numbers floating in the air around him. We cannot expel them, he said, not without destroying ourselves. But even as he spoke, knew the truth. Economics alone would not save the humans. The cultural conservatives on the council did not care about money. They cared about purity. They cared about tradition. They would rather be poor than polluted. The vote was still coming, and was no longer sure which side he was on. That night he went home and found his daughter listening to human music. She was dancing, moving her 4 arms in ways that no had ever moved before. She looked happy. Watched her for a long time. Then he went to his room and began writing a very different kind of report. On the hive world of Prime, something strange was happening. In a dark corner of the underground tunnels, far from the eyes of the hive mothers, young drones gathered in secret. They pressed close together, their antennae twitching, their compound eyes reflecting the soft glow of a hidden screen. A human woman sat among them. Her name was. She was small, even by human standards, with short hair and bright eyes. She was supposed to be teaching agricultural science. That was what her official papers said. But right now, she was teaching something far more dangerous. She was teaching music. The drones listened as strange sounds filled the tunnel, voices singing in harmony, beats that made their legs want to move, melodies that stirred feelings they had no names for. This is called pop music, said softly. On Earth, young people listen to this when they are happy, or when they are sad, or when they want to feel connected to others. A young drone named Click raised her foreleg. Teacher, she said, why does this sound make my thorax feel warm? Smiled, that is called emotion, Click. That is called joy. The drones looked at each other. Joy was not a word they were taught. Drones were taught duty, efficiency, and obedience. They were taught that individual feelings were weakness. They were taught that the hive was everything and the self was nothing. But here, in this dark tunnel, listening to human music, they were learning something new. Above ground, Hive Mother knew what was happening. She had known for months. Her spies had reported the secret gatherings. They had recorded the forbidden music. They had identified the human teacher who was spreading corruption through her hive. And yet had done nothing. She stood now in her command chamber looking at productivity reports. The numbers confused her. Drones who attended the secret music sessions were working harder, not less. They were more creative. They solved problems faster. They cooperated better. The corruption was making her hive stronger. Clicked her mandibles in frustration. She had spoken against humans at the council assembly. She had called for their expulsion. But privately, secretly, she was beginning to wonder if she had been wrong. Far across the galaxy, on the water world of, another change was taking place. There were warriors. For 10,000 years they had lived for battle and died without fear. Their culture had one purpose: fight, win, die with honor. There was no room for anything else. There was no room for peace. And there was no room for laughter. Then a human named arrived. Was not a soldier, he was not a diplomat, he was a comedian. He told jokes. He made funny faces. He did impressions of important people saying silly things. At first, they wanted to kill him. Making someone laugh was the same as making them weak. It was an insult. But was fast and he was clever. Before they could hurt him, he told a joke about a warrior who was so tough that he punched a star and broke his own fist. The warrior who was about to attack him stopped. His wide mouth twitched. Then, for the first time in his life, the warrior laughed. That laugh spread like fire through dry grass. Within a year, had started the first comedy club in history. Warriors gathered to hear him speak. They learned to tell their own jokes. They discovered that laughing at fear made fear smaller. They discovered that laughing at death made death less frightening. The suicide rate, once the highest in the galaxy, dropped by 70%. Warriors who once threw themselves into hopeless battles now wanted to live. They wanted to see another sunrise. They wanted to laugh again. The High Command was furious. They said he was weakening their species. But the young warriors disagreed. They said had given them something precious. He had given them a reason to survive. On the monastery worlds of the oldest species in the council faced their own crisis. A young monk named had discovered human philosophy, books written by humans thousands of years ago, asking questions that they had never dared to ask. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? Does existence have purpose beyond duty? Had written a paper combining spiritual traditions with human existential thought. The paper argued that questioning was not betrayal. It argued that doubt was not weakness. It argued that every individual soul had worth, not just the collective. The paper spread across the monastery networks. Young read it in secret. Old traditions began to crack. High Arbitrator Vel learned of this the night before the council vote. He returned to his private chambers to find his own offspring, a young barely out of childhood, hiding something under a sleeping mat. "What is that?" Vel demanded. His offspring hesitated, then slowly pulled out a collection of human books, stories, philosophy, poetry. Vel felt rage rising in his chest. This was exactly what he had warned against. This was the corruption he had sworn to stop. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "From the network," his offspring said quietly. "Father, I had to understand. I had to know why humans think the way they do." "And what did you learn?" Vel's voice was cold. His offspring looked up at him. There was no fear in those young eyes, only something that looked like peace. "I learned that existence has meaning beyond duty," the young said. "I learned that asking questions is not the same as rejecting answers. I learned that love matters and kindness matters, and that every life is precious." Vel stood frozen. "Is that truly corruption, Father?" his offspring asked. "Is it wrong to believe that I matter, that you matter, that every being in this universe has worth?" Vel could not answer, he could not speak at all. He turned and left the room. Behind him, his offspring returned to reading human stories about hope and dreams and the power of connection. The vote was in the morning. Vel had spent 300 years certain of his beliefs. He had never doubted. He had never questioned. Now, standing alone in the corridor outside his offspring's room, High Arbitrator Vel faced a terrible truth. He could not separate human influence from his own family without destroying everything his child had become. And he was no longer sure he wanted to. The night before the vote, Ambassador called an emergency session. The delegates filed into the assembly hall with tired eyes and angry murmurs. They had spent 3 days reviewing records. They had argued and debated and fought among themselves. Most had already made up their minds. The vote would be close, but humanity would lose. The cultural conservatives had enough support. Stood in the center of the hall just as she had 3 days ago. But this time, she was not alone. Behind her floated a massive holographic display, filled with documents and images that no one in the chamber had ever seen before. "Thank you for returning," said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I know many of you have already decided. I know many of you believe humans must be removed for the good of the galaxy." She paused. "Before you vote, there is one more thing you must see." High Arbitrator Vel leaned forward. "Ambassador, we have reviewed all records. There is nothing left to show." "No," said. "You have reviewed the records you were allowed to see. Tonight, I will show you the records that were hidden." The chamber went silent. Touched a control and the holographic display shifted. Old documents appeared, faded images, records dated 300 years in the past. 3 centuries ago, said, there was another species that faced this same tribunal. They were small, clever, and creative. They adapted to any environment. They made friends easily. They shared their ideas freely. Images of the appeared on the display. They looked almost childlike, with large eyes and delicate hands. They were smiling in every picture. They were accused of the same crimes you accuse us of today, continued. Cultural invasion, economic disruption, being too adaptable, being too influential. More documents appeared. Council voting records, formal charges, official decrees. The council voted to expel them. The vote was not close. It was nearly unanimous. His voice grew quieter. They had no deep economic ties. They had not woven themselves into galactic trade. They had simply been kind and creative and helpful, and because of that, they were easy to remove. The display changed again. New images appeared, burned cities, empty worlds, mass graves. Within 50 years of their expulsion, they were extinct. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Delegates who had been slouching in their seats sat up straight. Even Vel looked shaken. Without council protection, they had no allies, said. Without trade partners, they had no resources. Without friends, they had no one to help them when the empires outside council space came hunting. She let the images linger. Burned homes, dead children, an entire species erased from existence. They did nothing wrong. They simply existed, and for that crime they were murdered. The chamber was absolutely silent. But that is not the worst part, said. She touched the control again. New documents appeared, technical specifications, engineering diagrams, the original blueprints for faster-than-light communication, the first designs for translation matrices, the mathematical foundations of galactic navigation. They invented faster-than-light communication, said. They built the first translation matrices. They created the technology that made this council possible. Every ship you fly, every message you send, Every conversation we are having right now exists because of innovation." Her voice hardened. "And after you killed them, you erased them from history. You took their inventions and claimed them as council property. You deleted their names from the records. You pretended they never existed." The display showed side-by-side comparisons, original designs next to current council technology. They were identical. "The foundation of galactic civilization," said, "was built by a species you murdered for being too helpful." Delegate rose from her seat. Her compound eyes were wide. "This cannot be true," she said. "We would know. Someone would have told us." "Who would tell you?" asked. "The ones who remember are the ones who buried the truth. The ones who came after were never taught." High Arbitrator Vel's face had gone gray, grayer than usual. "How did you obtain these records?" he demanded. "Does it matter?" replied. "The records are real, they are true." She turned slowly, looking at each delegate in turn. "Humanity learned from this mistake. We saw what happens to species that are easy to remove, so we made ourselves impossible to remove. We wove our economy into yours. We spread our culture through your worlds. We made our technology essential to your daily lives." Her voice rose. "Not because we wanted to control you, but because we wanted to survive." She pointed at the images of the murdered. "You expelled innovation once before. You killed the very species that built everything you now take for granted. Their only crime was being kind. Their only sin was sharing their gifts." Lowered her hand. "Tomorrow, you will vote on whether to expel humanity. But now you know the truth. Now you know what the Council has done before. Now you know what it is capable of doing again." She stood tall, her eyes meeting Vel's across the chamber. "Ask yourselves one question. In 300 years, when your children's children look back at this moment, what do you want them to see? A council that learned from its mistakes, or a council that repeated them?" The display faded. The chamber was dark and silent. Vel raised his hand. "This session is suspended," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "The vote will be delayed. I require time to verify these claims." Delegates began to leave, but they moved slowly as if walking through water. Many looked at as they passed. Some looked angry, some looked confused. But most looked ashamed. Remained in the center of the chamber until everyone was gone. Then she let out a long breath. Her assistant, a young woman named, approached from the shadows. "Do you think it will work?" asked. Looked up at the empty seats, the silent platforms, the great bowl of judgment that had condemned them to death 300 years ago. "I do not know," she said honestly. "But now they cannot pretend they do not know. Now they have to choose who they want to be." She began walking toward the exit. "And sometimes," she said, "that is the hardest choice of all." The morning of the vote arrived with no ceremony. Delegates filled the assembly hall in silence. There was none of the usual chatter, none of the political whispers and secret deals. Everyone sat straight and still, as if waiting for something terrible to happen. Ambassador stood in her usual place at the center. She looked tired. She had not slept, but her back was straight and her eyes were clear. High Arbitrator Vel rose from his platform. He looked older than he had 3 days ago. The weight of 300 years seemed to press down on his thin gray shoulders. "The vote to expel humanity from the Galactic Council will now proceed," he said. "Before we begin, any delegate may speak." Silence, no one moved. Then slowly, delegate of the collective rose. Every eye turned toward her. She had been the first to speak against humanity. Her accusation about human music corrupting hives had started everything. Looked at, then she looked at the empty space where the images of the dead had floated the night before. "I withdraw my complaint," said. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "Human music has spread through our hives," continued. "This is true. Our young drones sing and dance and feel emotions they were never taught to feel. For years, I believed this was corruption." She paused. "I was wrong." The murmurs grew louder. "Since human music entered our hives, our productivity has increased. Our creativity has grown. Our young drones are not weaker. They are stronger. They work harder because they are happy. They solve problems because they are not afraid to think differently." Turned to face the full assembly. "I spoke against humans because I was afraid of change. But change is not death. Sometimes change is growth." She sat down. A moment later, the representative rose. His wet skin glistened under the lights. His wide mouth was set in a grim line. "We are warriors," he said. "We have always been warriors. We believed that laughter was weakness. We believed that joy was failure." He looked down at his webbed hands. "A human named came to our world and taught us to laugh. Our elders called him they said he was destroying our culture." The raised his head. "Before, our suicide rate was the highest in the galaxy. Our warriors threw themselves into death because they saw no reason to live. Now they want to survive. They want to see tomorrow. They want to laugh again." His voice cracked. "Did not destroy our culture. He saved our lives. The withdraw all complaints against humanity." One by one, species rose to withdraw their accusations. They admitted that human art had given their young people new ways to express beauty. They confessed that human trade practices had taught them the value of fairness. Even the gas-based species who had complained about human smell acknowledged that humans had shown them kindness when no other species would come near them. Finally, only one voice remained. High Arbitrator Vel stood alone on his platform. The entire chamber watched him. He was the oldest living member of the council. His vote carried more weight than any other. If he spoke against humanity, others might follow. If he condemned them, the vote could still go wrong. Vel was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. "Last night I returned to my home," he said. "I found my offspring reading human books, stories about hope, philosophy about meaning, poetry about love." His voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire hall. "I wanted to be angry. I wanted to take the books away. I wanted to protect my child from corruption." He paused. "But when I looked at my offspring's face, I did not see corruption. I saw peace. I saw happiness. I saw a young who had found answers to questions I never dared to ask." Vel closed his deep black eyes. "I have spent 300 years preserving the old ways. I have fought against change. I have feared anything new. I thought I was protecting our civilization." His eyes opened. "I was wrong." The chamber was absolutely still. "Humans did not conquer us," Vel said. "They did not threaten us. They did not demand that we change. They simply lived among us. They shared their stories and their music and their laughter and their tears, and in doing so, they reminded us why we built this council in the first place." He spread his thin gray arms wide. "We built it because we were lonely, because the universe is vast and cold and empty, because we hoped that somewhere we would find others who understood, others who felt what we felt, others who dreamed what we dreamed." His voice grew stronger. "Humans understand, and more than that, they care. They care about species they have never met. They care about worlds they have never seen. They care because caring is what humans do." Vel lowered his arms. "Humanity cannot be barred from this council, not because of their economy, not because of their technology, not because they have made themselves essential." He looked directly at. "Humanity cannot be barred because they have made us better. They have made us kinder. They have made us more alive. And a council that rejects kindness does not deserve to exist." He raised his hand. "I call the vote. All in favor of expelling humanity, signal now." Silence. Not a single hand rose. Not a single light blinked. Not a single voice spoke. All opposed. Every hand in the chamber rose. Every light blinked green. Every species, every delegate, every voice united in a single answer. No. Humanity would stay. Felt tears forming in her eyes. Beside her was already crying. In the gallery was laughing, was hugging a friend. Made a joke and somewhere a warrior laughed out loud. The vote was over. For the first time in council history, a motion to expel had failed unanimously. That evening, a celebration erupted in the station's common quarter. Aliens and humans danced together under lights of every color. Music played. Human music, drums, crystal chimes, all blending into something new and beautiful. High Arbitrator Vel sat in a quiet corner watching. He did not dance. He was too old, too stiff, too set in his ways. His offspring approached and sat beside him. "Father, are you angry?" Vel watched a human child teaching a child to dance. Their movements were clumsy and joyful, and utterly wrong by any traditional standard. They looked happy. "No," Vel said slowly, "I am not angry." He reached out and placed one thin gray hand on his offspring's shoulder. "I am learning." Above them, through the great windows of the station, the stars burned cold and bright in the endless dark. The universe was vast and ancient and indifferent to the tiny creatures who lived within it. But tonight, in this one small place, those tiny creatures had chosen connection over fear. They had chosen love over hate. They had chosen to grow together instead of dying alone. And that, perhaps, was the real reason why humans could never be barred from the Galactic Council. Not because they were strong, but because they helped everyone else become stronger too.